On March 12, 2011, Rachel Lay, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at work at 8 a.m. as usual to open the store. She noticed that the door was open and assumed it was due to the negligence of the person who closed the store the night before. When Rachel entered the store, the lights were off, and clothing and accessories were scattered everywhere. Realizing the store had been robbed, she called out to see if anyone was there and heard a groan, startled her, prompting her to rush outside to call the police. Next to the Lululemon store was an Apple store, which opened at 10 a.m. A man named Ryan Hodable was waiting outside. Rachel asked him to accompany her back to the Lululemon store, which Ryan agreed without knowing the context. The day before, the second-generation iPad tablets had been presented, and Ryan was waiting for the Apple store to open to buy one. When they entered the Lululemon store, Rachel asked Ryan to go to the back of the store to see where the groan came from. She had heard earlier. Ryan went to the back room and saw a body lying face down in a pool of blood. Called out to the manager to call the police, as it appeared to be a human body. As Ryan left the back room, he noticed another woman with her hands bound, seemingly unconscious but still breathing. Ryan told Rachel that one woman was dead and another was alive, and it appeared both had been assaulted. Rachel called the police a second time. The officers quickly arrived at the scene. It was around 8:20 a.m. when they saw the horrific scene. The store had apparently been robbed. One woman was dead in a pool of blood, and the other was alive but unresponsive, bound with tape, injured in the face. The victims were identified as Lululemon employees Jana Murray, the deceased, and Brittany Norwood, survivor. Both worked the evening shift and closed the store around 10 p.m. It was unclear if it was a robbery, a revenge act, or if Jana tried to protect the store and was killed while Brittany survived by complying with the perpetrator's demands. Brittany Norwood was taken to a hospital on the outskirts of the city for her injuries to be treated and to determine if she needed to be hospitalized. At that time, the extent of her injuries was unknown. She had visible lacerations on her chest, legs, arms, and forehead. The most noticeable was a 5 centimeters long cut on her right thumb, possibly sustained while trying to defend herself from a knife attack. Jana Murray's body was taken to the forensic morgue for an autopsy. The results were unexpected, as the attack was brutal and she had more severe injuries than her colleague, indicating she might have tried to resist the robber, or it was possible that Jana was the reason the attacker came to the premises to kill her directly. The autopsy revealed that Jana Murray's body had a total of 330 wounds, suggesting an extremely violent attack, typically motivated by rage. Question arose: who could have been so angry or filled with so much hatred to inflict so many wounds? This wasn't just murder, but also torture, as Jana remained conscious for most of the ordeal. The number of wounds suggested a very personal attack by someone who hated her. At the crime scene, forensic experts also found one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the case: a bloody footprint from a Reebok sports shoe, size 46. They concluded that this footprint belonged to the person who committed the attacks. Both female victims of the attacks had athletic background. Jana Murray was born on November 22, 1980, in Houston, Texas. At the time of her murder, she was 30 years old. Her family included her parents, David and Phyllis, herself and 2 other siblings. Everyone said she was a very positive woman. Jana traveled the world, including to China for studies, and visited various places in Asia, including Japan. One of her hobbies was staying healthy, exercising, and especially practicing yoga. On her last birthday, when she turned 30, Jana filmed herself bungee jumping, showing her adventurous and joyful spirit. Her enthusiasm for sports was evident from a young age. She participated in ballet, jazz, step dancing, volleyball, and more. Details of her life included her passion for Mexican food, and her family now visits her favorite Mexican restaurant every year on her birthday to remember her. Everyone in her life spoke highly of her, and no one understood why Jana was harmed or killed. Investigators questioned everyone, including her boyfriend whom she planned to marry, but no one had a motive. It seemed Jana had no enemies, but someone secretly hated her. After graduating from college, Jana moved to Arlington, Virginia, to attend Johns Hopkins University. During this time, she went to the Lululemon store in that city looking for a job, but they told her they weren't hiring. However, Montgomery County store in Bethesda, Maryland was hiring. Despite it being a half-hour drive away, she didn't want to miss the opportunity because she loved the brand. Jana submitted her resume and was hired a few days later, not only because of her yoga skills but also because of her personality. She became one of the top sellers at Lululemon. In contrast to Jana, Brittany, the second victim, had a more complicated life. Brittany Norwood was born into a poor family with 8 siblings and had little reason to smile. She and her family constantly faced racism, yet her classmates noticed she never lost her composure and was very cheerful. Sports, especially soccer, helped her. Brittany played soccer in high school and became one of the best players in her neighborhood, earning a scholarship to New York University. Her dream was to play for the official U.S. women's national team and participate in the World Cup. But this dream was cut short by financial constraints and lack of opportunities. Brittany studied sociology at New York University, where she had a scholarship, then moved to Arlington, Virginia, where she worked 2 jobs, in a hotel and at a Lululemon shop. Reports say she was transferred to the Montgomery County store shortly before the attack. Both women lived in Arlington at the time of the attack, led different lives, but shared a passion for sports. They might have been targeted by someone who intended to harm them. Sadly, one of them died, but at least one woman survived, possibly to bring justice for her colleague. The initial evidence found at the crime scene included the bloody footprint of a man and a knife used as the primary weapon in the attack. Investigators noted that multiple items from the store were used to inflict Jana's wounds. Additionally, 3 bundles of money were missing from the locker. It should not be overlooked that the surviving woman, Brittany Norwood, might explain how it all happened and who was responsible. Her description could lead the police to a clue. The robbery suggested that this could have been the main motive. The number of injuries didn't match how robberies are usually carried out. In most cases, robbers don't intend to kill unless they feel compelled to if they are caught or the person refuses to comply. Moreover, these murders are typically quick and involve firearms. But Jana was attacked with a knife, and the attacker took the time to torture. On March 12th at 2:35 p.m., Brittany Norwood was first questioned in a suburban hospital. She stated that the attack was not carried out by one person, by 2 masked men. One of them dealt with Jana, and the other attacked her. According to her version, she was assaulted with a coat hanger. Brittany could not provide more details, as she was under sedation. Officers agreed to question her again in the coming days if she remembered anything else. The same day, investigators questioned the staff of the neighboring Apple store, which was open until 11 p.m., knowing that the attacks must have taken place around that time. They asked if anyone had seen anything, and the first witness came forward, saying he had only heard voices. He said he heard 2 female voices. One of them screamed, "Talk to me, don't do this, tell me what's going on," and the other female voice said, "Oh my God, help me, please help me." Then he only heard screams and groans, and when everything went quiet, he noticed the sound of someone dragging something. Surprisingly, the witness, an Apple employee, did not call the police. He simply reported the matter to a security guard who checked the Lululemon store, looked out the window, found nothing unusual, and returned to the Apple store. The employee also testified that he later reported this to the Apple store manager and left work around 11 p.m., after which no more noise was heard. Investigators went to Brittany Norwood's apartment to see if she remembered anything else about the incident. When they entered the apartment, she invited them to the living room to talk. They asked her if she could remember anything else from the past 2 days to help identify the 2 men she had mentioned. Brittany tried to explain how the events unfolded, saying that when the 2 men entered the room, one went straight to her while the other grabbed Jana. Brittany described her attackers as white men wearing ski masks and estimated from their voices that they were between 25 and 27 years old. She noted that her attacker was about 165 centimeters tall, and Jaina's attacker was slightly taller at about 180 centimeters. Both were dressed in black and wore gloves. Brittany also said that her attacker, after killing her colleague, wanted to rob the store while the other started assaulting her. As she began talking about Jaina's murder and her own assault, she started crying. It was clear that Brittany had gone through something traumatic, but the investigators needed as much information as possible because she was the only survivor and the only eyewitness at the crime scene. Brittany also mentioned that the man said to her, "Your name is Brittany, and you live on such and such a street," which scared her even more. But she also told the investigators that she believed the attackers might have seen 2 bills in her wallet for internet and utilities, which had her name and address on them and were likely stolen. Another detail Brittany mentioned was that her attacker, while assaulting her, began insulting her and even made racist remarks. After the insults, the man pushed her onto Jaina's body, which was already lifeless at that point. The investigators asked Brittany if her family was supporting her. She confirmed this and said she had talked to her family about moving back to Seattle for safety reasons, but also mentioned that she had recently started a new job in Bethesda and was looking forward to returning to work once she recovered from her injuries. Since the attackers knew Brittany's address, the investigators gave her a direct contact in case one of them showed up at her home. However, during the analysis of the evidence, investigators discovered something new. Didn't make sense. Among the evidence was a medical report that caught their attention. It stated that Brittany Norwood had not been sexually assaulted and described the injuries found on her body, some on her arms and some on her legs. But the most noticeable were a cut on her forehead, scratch on her back, and a 5-centimeter cut on her right thumb. Compared to the wounds inflicted on Jaina, what had been done to Brittany was almost nothing. But why would she lie about the violence? Another witness came forward, Brittany and Jaina's boss. She recalled the situation on the night of the attack. She said that around 10 p.m., she received a call from Brittany, who said she had forgotten her wallet in the store and asked her to contact Jaina to come back and open the door for her. Jaina closed the store every night and was the only one with a key. 4 days after the attack, investigators began to suspect that Brittany might be hiding something. She became a person of interest in the investigation. Since Brittany had to provide hair samples and fingerprints, investigators told her they needed to meet with her later that day for further questioning. They never told her she was a person of interest in the investigation, but only said the samples were needed to rule out her presence at the crime scene, which is a routine procedure when someone other than the suspect is present at the crime scene. However, the purpose was clear, to see if they could prove that Brittany had actually committed the attack, which was very important as it could uncover inconsistencies in her story since she was already a suspect. The interrogation lasted 2 hours and 55 minutes. First hour was spent collecting samples, and the remaining time was spent questioning Brittany's statement. She repeatedly mentioned that the attackers were 2 white men. She was asked if she knew what kind of car Jaina drove, but she said she didn't. Brittany provided more details, mentioned her fear of confronting one of them, and cried when talking about Jaina. The investigators let her go and asked her to return on March 18th at 10 a.m. The officers were waiting for decisive evidence to make an arrest. And that evidence was surveillance footage from a parking lot near Lululemon, showing Brittany driving the victim's car alone. The interrogation on March 18th, Brittany's 4th, began normally. She stated she was looking forward to moving to Seattle to live with her brother Chris, and her only concern about the move was that she wanted to continue helping with the investigations. The lead officer then asked Brittany again about Jaina's car. Again, she responded that she didn't know what kind of car her colleague drove. The detective then showed her a photo of Brittany parking Jaina's car on the night of the attack in a lot near the crime scene. Brittany then said that the attackers had forced her to drive the car there, and that they had constantly followed her. When she arrived at the parking lot, she saw a police car. but did not call for help because she allegedly feared for her life. However, from the Lululemon store, she couldn't be seen at all because she turned right after 2 blocks and was simply no longer visible, which contradicted her statement that she was allegedly followed. The detective told Brittany that he didn't believe her story, that there were inconsistencies, and that everything was made up. She was read her rights and arrested on suspicion of murdering Jayna Murray. By this time, several pieces of evidence had already been analyzed. DNA from Jayna's fingernails confirmed that the scratch on Brittany's back was inflicted by Jayna during the attack, likely in self-defense. Although not many surveillance recordings were found, the existing ones showed only Brittany and not the 2 masked men. Additionally, the woman had never been sexually assaulted. She withheld details and changed many others to make it look like 2 people had committed the assault. Prosecution also had witnesses against Brittany, including former soccer teammates from a university in New York, who said Brittany was nice but had a small problem. She was a kleptomaniac. She constantly stole and was expelled from the university and lost her scholarship because of it. It was also proven that the wound on her right thumb was inflicted while she was attacking Jayna. It was also found that she had tied her own hands to simulate an attack. Several wounds on her body were self-inflicted, and she lied for days to both the authorities and her family, who had been convinced of her innocence for months. Additionally, it was proven that the bloody male footprint found in the store was made by Brittany herself, using a training device later found in the store. The most challenging part of the trial was proving why Brittany brutally murdered Jayna and what her motive was. 5 items Brittany allegedly used to inflict wounds on Jayna's body were presented as evidence: a hammer, a dagger, a coat hanger, a stick from one of the coat hangers, and a Swiss Army knife. It was proven that the motive was not to steal money, as the missing money from the locker was hidden in the same room. In October, the trial began. The evidence was so overwhelming that Brittany Norwood pleaded guilty to self-defense, claiming the attack occurred after Jayna said mean things to her and attacked her first. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. On January 27, 2012, the judge announced the verdict, sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's clear that she killed Jayna. The evidence is conclusive, and she partially admitted to killing her, although she claimed it was in self-defense. But the question remains, why? Although the prosecution labeled the attack as revenge for being caught stealing a pair of sports pants, Brittany never explained the real reason, and what transpired between them made the attack so aggressive. Many believe the true motive was envy. Brittany was jealous of Jayna's life, and that the murder might not have been because of a small theft, but because Brittany wanted Jayna's life, which she could never have due to her own poverty. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves. See you in the next video.
Some people take all difficulties and blows of fate in stride and can even laugh at themselves, but that's not true for everyone. There are some people you shouldn't make fun of because it can be life-threatening. This was also the case in today's story. Todd Kohlhepp was born on March 7, 1971 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA. When the boy was only 2 years old, his parents decided to divorce. He was unable to develop a close relationship with his father and mother, but he stayed with her. Todd took his stepfather's surname, McComb, when his mother remarried, but he also had a very difficult relationship with him. Todd always had major social problems and was unable to communicate well with his peers and other people. He saw everyone he met as a potential rival. Even in kindergarten, he was constantly arguing with other children, often getting into fights and destroying other people's property. Todd behaved aggressively in every situation, as if unable to control his emotions, including his anger. He wasn't particularly friendly at home either. At a young age, Todd began treating animals cruelly. He killed a goldfish with bleach and shot a dog with an air rifle. Sadistic behavior and Todd were inextricably linked. These terrible tendencies accompanied him throughout his life. While he was still in early school, his mother moved to South Carolina with her stepfather. The woman once again decided to separate from her new husband, which happened in 1982. The very next year, she met and married a new man. Todd was 12 at the time. Despite his young age, he was the cause of conflict in the house almost daily. The boy was so uncontrollable and aggressive that his mother and stepfather feared for their lives and had him committed to a psychiatric hospital. However, this did little to help. They hoped that a move to South Carolina would soften his character and lead to positive changes, but that didn't happen either. Todd soon announced that he didn't like it there and wanted to move in with his biological father. Since the divorce, they hadn't seen each other for 8 years. The man lived in Arizona. The son probably thought that this would allow him to start a new life and gain a new perspective on life. After the move to Tempe, Arizona, it quickly became clear that the boy's behavior would not improve. His biological father described his son as someone who could only feel hate. There he was also admitted to psychiatric care several times. Despite all efforts, the situation only worsened. In November 1986, the troubled teenager Todd committed his first serious crime. At the time, the boy was only 15 years old. One Saturday, he simply walked down the street where he met his 14-year-old neighbor, Christy Granada. The student deceived her, kidnapped her, took her to his father's house, taped her mouth shut, tied her up, held a gun to her head, and raped her. This attack was unprovoked. He had had little contact with his victim beforehand. They only greeted each other when they happened to meet. After the attack, Todd threatened to kill her if she told anyone. He convinced her that he would shoot her brothers, sisters, and entire family. The underage kidnapper intimidated her so much that the victim actually wanted to remain silent. His cruel and manipulative personality had already developed. Todd was so convinced of his own importance and superiority that he believed he could let any atrocity go unpunished. The kidnapping victim was actually willing to remain silent. The student had no idea that her relatives were already worried and actively searching for her. Shortly before the attack, her parents had taught their children how to behave in an emergency situation. The missing girl's younger brother became anxious when he couldn't find her at home and called the police. Fortunately, Todd eventually released his victim. She returned home just as her brother was speaking to the police. The girl was forced to explain where she had been and what had happened to her. The 15-year-old offender was arrested. From the beginning, Todd showed no concern for the victim. He was only concerned about how long he would spend in prison. His lawyer claimed that his client would not harm anyone in the future. Todd had simply made a mistake. At the age of 15, he was sent to prison for his first extended period. There, the teenager changed his behavior fundamentally. His brutal nature was almost invisible. He was a model inmate, but in reality, he only skillfully concealed his inner struggle and innate cruelty. On November 24, 2001, the offender was released from prison. He was now 30 years old. He spent half of that time behind bars, but he didn't waste any time there. Todd completed a degree in computer technology. After his release from prison, he decided to return to South Carolina, wanting to be with his mother after his release. Now she could no longer oppose him. Behind bars, Todd seemed to have embarked on a path to recovery and decided to integrate into society. To do this, he needed to find a suitable job. Todd didn't get along well with other people. He would have found it difficult to work in a team, so he decided to become self-employed. After changing jobs several times, mainly as a designer, his desire only grew stronger. 5 years after his release, in 2006, he applied for a license to sell real estate in South Carolina. At the time, he was 35 years old. In response to his application, he was told that he could not be granted a license because he was on the sex offender registry. It seemed as if the man had no chance of starting his own business, but that was not the case. Todd learned to hide his brutal nature very well and became cunning and calculating. The man arranged a personal appointment to explain his situation. Todd recounted the incident in detail, downplaying the brutality. He attributed it all to a simple misunderstanding with his girlfriend and his age, explaining that it had all happened consensually, but that his girlfriend had simply been offended and wanted to teach him a lesson, which was why he was sent to prison. His plan worked. With this lie, he was able to convince the licensing authority that it was a simple misunderstanding and that he wanted a second chance. In June 2006, Todd Kohlhepp received his license as a real estate agent. The convicted criminal founded his own business and continued to live the life of a respected, exemplary citizen who had simply been defrauded in his youth. His business flourished and brought in good income. The man became wealthy and successful. Interestingly, at the same time, he became an avid gun collector. He owned numerous pistols and rifles. According to Todd, he inherited this passion from his father, who also collected such things. This interest fit well with Todd's other hobbies. He loved everything related to power and strength. He even got a pilot's license. The man was enthusiastic about motorcycles and fast cars. Outwardly, he looked like a successful man with a very charismatic and strong personality. Todd wasn't the only successful person in town. In November 2003, 30-year-old Scott Ponder opened a motorcycle shop. He was helped by his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy, who worked alongside him. He also had a passion for this form of transportation. This business was a dream come true for him. He ran a thriving business. Todd often stopped by to admire the motorcycles and eventually bought one for himself. Scott's fiancée, Melissa, moved in with him in 2002. They married in January. In November 2003, his wife learned she was pregnant. Their first child was due. They seemed to be a happy couple, having the time of their lives. The Ponders had no idea how radically everything would change in just a few days. On November 6, 2003, Scott and his wife drove to their motorcycle shop as usual. His wife dropped him off in the parking lot. As she drove past, their eyes met and Scott blew her a kiss. She drove to the medical center for her first ultrasound appointment. It was such an important and exciting event for her, but Scott couldn't accompany her, even though he hoped to see and hear his baby's heartbeat. Unfortunately, the businessman was very busy at the dealership and couldn't just leave his work. Melissa waited for her husband to return to tell him how everything had gone and what the doctor had said. Instead, at 3 p.m., the woman received a call from a concerned shop employee reporting a shooting at the motorcycle shop. Melissa was on the other side of town but dropped everything and headed there. The scene was very noisy. About 10 police cars had gathered. The street was blocked off and she wasn't allowed through, even though the woman said her husband, Scott, must be there. Just minutes after arriving, the worried pregnant woman was told that her husband had been shot during a robbery at the dealership. She didn't understand what was happening. She tried to contact her husband's mother, who was also working that day. It turned out that Beverly had also been shot. A total of 4 people were killed in the massacre. The third was 29-year-old Brian Lucas, and the fourth had not been identified at the time of Melissa's arrival. It was later determined that the victim was 26-year-old mechanic Chris Sherbert, who had worked at the dealership. All victims were shot in cold blood at close range, but the identity of the killer initially remained unknown. At that moment, the pregnant woman's world collapsed. She lost her beloved husband and his mother. The family business was also in jeopardy. There was no one to take care of her. Despite all the difficulties, Melissa managed to pull herself together and overcome all the problems. 7 months later, in June 2004, the widow gave birth to a boy, whom she named Scott Jr. in honor of her late husband. All this time she wanted, above all, to know who had taken her beloved father and husband, as well as her child. Law enforcement authorities continued their investigation into the sensational murder of 4 people. Due to the brutality of the crime, it was assumed that the perpetrator must have known his victims personally and had a strong motive, but there were no concrete leads pointing to a suspect. The victims' business relationships, relatives, and friends were analyzed, but a possible perpetrator could not be identified. Nothing was missing from the store. All witnesses to the crime had been killed. To make matters worse, the cameras at the shop weren't working that day. At the end of 2004, unexpected progress was finally made in this direction. Melissa was summoned to the police station. She hoped that the investigators would tell her the perpetrator's name. Instead, the young mother ended up in an interrogation room. The investigators told her that she had accidentally left one of Scott Jr.'s diapers there a few months earlier. The police compared the boy's DNA with the traces found at the crime scene. It turned out that it did not match the samples from the deceased husband. It was suspected that the woman had not had the child from her husband, but from her lover, and thus had a motive to eliminate her husband. Melissa was so stunned to have gone from victim to prime suspect that she even suggested having her husband's body exhumed. She was convinced that only he could be the child's father and that this would prove her innocence. The woman was so convincing that the police decided to double-check everything. It turned out they had indeed made a mistake. The samples from Scott and Brian, whose DNA had been collected at the shop, had been incorrectly labeled, which is why the samples didn't match. Melissa's son was indeed Scott's. Although the police admitted their mistake, the damage to the woman's reputation was enormous. The local community closely followed the events surrounding the bloody massacre at the motorcycle shop. Many readily seized on the new rumors about a possible lover of Melissa's. The rumors spread throughout the area. The woman was looked at askance, and her behavior was whispered about behind her back. All of this ultimately broke Melissa's heart. She decided to return home with her child. There, however, everyone avoided her and her son. The woman didn't want this to affect the boy's relationships with the children at kindergarten and school. The year she was a suspect had caused severe damage to her reputation. Now the young mother decided that the only way to start anew was to return to her small hometown. Investigators, meanwhile, were once again at a dead end. There wasn't a single suspect for the shooting. The crime remained unsolved for more than a decade. It was assumed that the attack on the shop could have been carried out by a disgruntled employee or customer who had acted out their grudge in such an extreme way. However, none of the employees were prone to conflict. Scott had created a very pleasant working environment there. No suspected dissatisfied customers could be found. It was simply impossible to find a motive for the attacker. During this time, the man was actually doing very well. He honed his skills and built a career as one of the top real estate agents in Spartanburg, South Carolina. This continued until 2015. Then the 44-year-old agent bought a huge lot in Woodruff. It seemed as if he wanted to build a house, which was why he had bought such a large lot. After the purchase, he ordered local hunters to stay away from his land, declaring, "Your hunting days are over." He did indeed intend to radically change this place, but not quite in the way many had imagined. On December 22, 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Coxey and his 25-year-old wife, Megan Coxey, were reported missing. They were a newlywed couple who, unlike the other victims in this story, had experienced many problems. Both had suffered from substance abuse in the past. They had a child who was taken away from them by social services due to the parents' use of illegal substances. Law enforcement authorities pursued the troubled couple, but without success. Even an analysis of the missing person's cell phones yielded no results. It is likely that their means of communication were broken. The couple had virtually no relatives or close friends who might be concerned about them. Therefore, the missing persons report was filed relatively late. No one put any particular pressure on the police to search for them. No volunteers were found to form search teams for Johnny and Megan. The police had few resources, so the search progressed slowly. There were no leads, the investigation stalled, and everyone calmed down. They simply stopped looking for them. What could possibly happen to a pair of dependents? On September 4, 2016, the father of the Carver family called the police and reported his 32-year-old son, Charles Carver, missing. He had an excellent relationship with his son. They were in daily contact via phone and messenger. The relatives usually talked about their lives and sports. The last message the father received from his son was about football. The silence lasted too long. His son's complete absence worried him greatly because something like this had never happened before. The Carvers tried to clarify Charlie's fate, but it turned out that he wasn't the only one who had disappeared. His new girlfriend, Kala Brown, had also disappeared. Just 5 days after they met and first met at Walmart, both of them had disappeared. They weren't addicts. The couple had no problems. A spontaneous escape was out of the question, as it would have been pointless. The police began checking Charles and Kala's cell phone data. It turned out that a successful local real estate agent had recently contacted the woman. At the end of August, this man contacted 32-year-old Charlie and his 30-year-old girlfriend. She knew the man and had regular contact with him via social media. He had previously offered her a job with him. This time he did the same. However, there were no further leads. At first, this contact was simply dismissed, but days of searching turned into weeks. There was no information about the young people, so a more thorough investigation was launched. The efforts of the missing couple's families contributed significantly to this. Until October 2016, it seemed as if they had reached a dead end. Finally, investigators analyzed the locations of the missing couple's cell phones. It turned out that they had last been located near Todd's property, where he had invited the couple to work. The police discovered who owned the property, and everything seemed suspicious. So 2 months after the disappearance of Charlie Carver and Kala Brown, on November 3, 2016, the police found themselves on his property. One group went to Todd's house, which was located in part of his vast property. The second group quickly found a green metal container standing alone in the back, invisible from the road. Its green color blended in with the foliage, and the container was inconspicuous. As the officers listened, they realized someone was inside. It took quite a while to pick all the locks and cut the chains blocking the entrance. When the police officers entered the container, they found Kala inside, bound with chains, tortured, emaciated, but alive. Charlie was nowhere to be seen. She explained that he had been dead for a long time. According to the prisoner, he had offered her a part-time job with her boyfriend and taken her to his property. As soon as they got out of the car, he attacked her. He shot the boy 3 times in the chest. Charlie died instantly, while the attacker put Kala in chains and left her in the container, where she was held for 2 months. When Todd was informed that a prisoner had been found on his property, he acted surprised and tried to deny everything. However, this was pointless, as the victim of his torture described in detail that he was the one who had attacked her. 30-year-old Kala Brown was freed after 65 days in captivity. She said that her perpetrator raped her twice a day. He was very brutal, often tortured her, and treated her like his property. She endured it all because she was afraid to fight back and simply hoped that someone would search for her and find her soon, which is what happened. Kala was certain that if she had fought back, she would have been killed like her boyfriend. While examining the area around the container, the police discovered 3 shallow graves. Charlie's body was in one and bodies were in the other 2. All were clothed. Kala knew nothing of any other victims. Only an analysis of the dental records revealed that they were Megan and Johnny Coxey, who had disappeared a year earlier. No motive for the kidnappings and torture could be found. There was no connection between the victims. They didn't even know each other. Only the perpetrator himself could solve this mystery. The 45-year-old was arrested and imprisoned. During the initial interrogation, investigators attempted to obtain details of the crimes and a confession. It turned out that the rapist and murderer was indeed willing to cooperate with the authorities. But instead of talking about the bodies and the living woman on his property, he reported something else. With undisguised pride, the murderer began to recount the shooting 13 years earlier. Todd Kohlhepp confessed that he loved motorcycles and often drove to the motorcycle shop where Scott worked with his family. The owner of the shop had even begun to form friendly conversations with him, having become accustomed to his visits. Todd bought a motorcycle there, which he later disliked, so he spent a long time looking for other models. Then Todd decided to return his motorcycle, which he no longer liked. However, Scott refused to take it back and even mocked him, which greatly angered the murderer. He didn't show his anger, but his malice grew. At some point, Todd decided to go to the dealership to take revenge. On November 6, 2003, he entered the shop as usual, strolled among the motorcycles, and waited until there were no other customers. Then he pulled out a pistol and began shooting the employees in cold blood. The last ones to be killed were Brian and Scott. They were still able to react and tried to escape, but the perpetrator's bullets hit them right in front of the entrance door. Because the killer got away with it, he began to feel untouchable, which only made the situation worse. He was unstoppable, he was bloodthirsty. New crimes on his part were only a matter of time. When he recounted the shooting at the motorcycle shop, he clearly showed no remorse for what had happened. On the contrary, he seemed proud of himself. Like many serial criminals, he wanted to impress others. For him, murder was a means of gaining recognition. After all these revelations, investigators contacted Melissa, Scott's widow. She was shocked that after 13 years, it had finally become clear what had happened at the shop and who was behind the shooting. What shocked her most was the authorities' impotence. The investigators had even tried to frame them but could do nothing until blood was shed again. If the police hadn't gone to Todd's property to search for Charlie and his girlfriend, the case might never have been solved. During interrogations, the self-important criminal was unstoppable. He delighted in recounting details of other crimes, including the murder of the newlywed couple. The last place Megan and Johnny were seen alive was Todd's property. He had also offered them work on his property. Naturally, the couple, who were struggling financially, gladly accepted the offer. The killer didn't kill them immediately, but first lulled them into a false sense of security by offering them easy work for good money. The man simply took advantage of the situation to get them to do as much work as possible on the property. But after their first meeting with him, both people were doomed to die. At first, he observed them closely and quickly realized that they were the ideal pair of victims no one would be looking for. As it turned out, on December 19, 2015, the real estate agent, who had already gained their trust, suggested that the newlyweds return to his property to clear some debris. He picked them up himself and drove them to a secluded part of his property. As soon as they both got out of the car, he shot Johnny first. The young man died instantly and his wife was paralyzed, waiting in confusion for her fate. However, the man didn't want to kill her immediately, like Kala. There was a large metal container here that served as a mobile storage unit. Now it became a torture chamber for Megan. She spent about a week there, trying to escape several times and even setting fire to the house. He confessed that she behaved like a caged animal, was causing too many problems, so he decided to get rid of her. He cold-bloodedly shot her in the back of the head. Unlike her, Kala was obedient. That's exactly what saved her life. Johnny's grave was already located next to the container that served as a makeshift prison. He dug another hole in which he buried Megan. After that, he returned to his job as a real estate agent and acted as if nothing had happened. In reality, he was looking for a new victim to torture. According to Todd Kohlhepp's confessions, his list of crimes amounted to at least 7 murders and the kidnapping of a woman. Of course, the investigation and trial for all of these incidents would have taken an enormous amount of time and resources, which is why Todd Kohlhepp was offered life imprisonment instead of the maximum sentence if he would officially confess to all the crimes. He accepted the offer. On May 26, 2017, the serial killer was sentenced to 7 life sentences, 1 for each victim killed. Added to this was an additional 60 years for the kidnapping of Kala Brown. In July 2019, the victims of Todd Kohlhepp's crimes attended a hearing in a wrongful death civil lawsuit. Their goal was to obtain compensation from the company owned by the killer. The woman he had tortured for more than 2 months described in detail what she had experienced in that ill-fated container, the constant violence and the pain she had endured. As Kala recounted her torment, the defendant watched her intently and listened without showing anything. Kala never took her eyes off him. It was a true revelation. After she told her story, Todd's lawyer asked how much she wanted in compensation, but the torture victim couldn't name a specific amount. Kala hadn't even considered it. She said she didn't care. The main goal was to see the perpetrator, to look him in the eye, and thus overcome herself and her fears. Colin knew that no amount of money could bring back the dead boy and the 2 months of freedom she had lost through torture. Then the hearings, initiated by Scott Ponder's family, took place. His widow, Melissa, also described in detail what she had gone through with her husband's death, what it was like raising a son without a father. The most powerful moment in the trial was when the 13-year-old boy bravely walked past the killer, looked him straight in the eye, and told him he forgave him. Melissa was proud of Scott Jr. She was convinced that had he been alive, his father would undoubtedly have appreciated this act. The boy showed a strength and maturity unusual for his age. In August 2020, Todd's assets were confiscated and the proceeds were distributed to the victims' families. But the serial killer's story didn't end there. Since then, he has repeatedly claimed there were more victims. He mentioned at least 2 more murders, but has so far avoided details. The identities of the other victims and their bodies have not been found. The investigation against him is ongoing. Police believe he may have used his work as a real estate agent to get close to people, break into their homes, and commit crimes. However, there is no evidence to support these allegations. All acquaintances described Todd in different ways. A client who had sold a house remembered him as an extremely sociable person and a professional in his field. He often talked about his firearms and actively flirted with her. A female employee of the real estate agent described Todd as short-tempered and aggressive, unable to control himself. Another colleague said he often watched adult films, even at work. Acquaintances reported that he frequently visited a restaurant where he harassed waitresses. He had a reputation as a real womanizer. It turned out that one of his victims, Megan Coxey, had worked at that restaurant. He probably met her there. He posted frightening reviews on the marketplace. In one review of a shovel with a folding handle, for example, he advised keeping it in the car in case you ever need to bury bodies and have forgotten your regular shovel at home. In a review of a knife, he wrote, "I haven't stabbed anyone with it yet, but I hope to do so with a tool as high quality as this." In a review of a padlock, he wrote, "Reliable locks. You need 5 of these on a container to keep it safe from escaping." Such reviews sounded extremely threatening, but no one paid any attention to them at the time. For all these incidents, not only the murderer was charged, but also his friend, a suspected accomplice named Dustin Stanfield. He knew that Dustin Stanfield was a convicted felon. Nevertheless, between 2012 and 2016, he bought him at least 12 guns and 5 silencers. As it turns out, it was thanks to this man that an extensive collection of firearms was amassed, which were used in the murders. In 2018, the accomplice pleaded guilty to 36 charges related to these transactions. He was sentenced to a total of 8 years and 3 months in prison for all of these charges. Dustin Stanfield was released from prison on November 13, 2023, while Todd Kohlhepp remains behind bars and will never leave the prison walls. Thanks for watching and take care of yourselves.
Sometimes fate plays a nasty trick and causes history to repeat itself. This was the case in this case as well. The daughter unknowingly followed the same dark path as her mother, committing one horrific act after another, until tragedy finally struck. Candice Renea Diaz was born in 1994 in Western Kentucky. Her mother and father, Royna and Timothy, became parents at an early age. They didn't set a good example for their child and were also addicted to illegal substances. So they raised their daughter in chaotic conditions. When Candace was 4, Timothy was sent to prison. It is unknown what crime he committed. From then on, Roina often left her daughter with her mother, even though her mother was an alcoholic and didn't take good care of her granddaughter. On one of these days, tragedy struck. A fire broke out in the house, and little Candace suffered severe burns all over her body. She subsequently had to undergo several surgeries to recover. Following this incident, Roina and her mother were arrested and charged with child neglect. They were taken to the Hopkins County Jail in Madisonville. Candace was placed in the care of her aunt, Cynthia Diaz. In June 2000, when Candace turned 7, Roina's parental rights were officially terminated. This happened after Cynthia filed for custody. The argument was that Roina had not cared for Candace for 2 years and had not supported her financially. While in custody, she initially called her daughter several times, but soon cut off all contact. When Timothy learned that Cynthia had filed for sole custody of Candace, he attempted to object and filed a countersuit. However, since he was still in jail and, like Roina, had no contact with his daughter for 2 years and had not supported her financially, his arguments were too weak, so he withdrew his lawsuit and also lost his parental rights. Cynthia officially adopted Candace. Since Candace began living with her aunt, her life changed dramatically. Cynthia treated her like her own daughter and strove to provide her with a stable, peaceful life so that the girl could completely put the memories of the past behind her. But childhood trauma shaped Candace's fate, and as she grew older, she began to repeat her biological mother's mistakes, making one bad decision after another. When Candace graduated from high school, she moved to Michigan with her adoptive mother. There, she met a boy named Kyle Barrett. The two quickly bonded, and Candace soon became pregnant. She was 18 at the time, and Kyle was 20. The couple moved into Cynthia's house, but they never officially made their relationship. On July 3, 2013, Candace gave birth to an adorable little daughter named Gabrielle, but everyone affectionately called her Gabby. The birth of the child negatively impacted the couple's relationship. In early 2014, Kyle wanted to break up with Candace and left Cynthia's house. In early 2015, when little Gabby was only 18 months old, Candace began a relationship with a man named Brad Edward Fields, who was 4 years older than her. Candace often left Cynthia's house and spent more and more time with her new boyfriend. She soon became pregnant, and the couple decided to move in together, but they weren't in a hurry to bring Gabby home with them. Candace and Brad moved several times until they finally settled in a trailer at the Rosenville Woods Community Trailer Park in Belleville. While Candace was away, Cynthia looked after Gabby. And it would have been better if things had stayed that way because the woman took good care of the girl and provided a stable life. However, the situation changed when Gabby turned 4. Cynthia tried to enroll her in preschool, but was unable to because she wasn't her legal guardian. As a result, Gabby had to move in with her mother and her new boyfriend. Candace had already given birth to a second daughter named Zoe. At first, the couple's relationship seemed happy, but everything soon changed. Rare arguments escalated into constant scandals with physical altercations. The couple constantly argued while drunk and seemed completely oblivious to the presence of their children. One day in 2016, an argument escalated into a shooting. Candace called 911 after fleeing the house and seeking refuge in a local club. The reason for her escape was Brad's violent behavior. He punched her in the face, smashed her cell phone, shot her dog, and then shot himself in the foot, Candace claimed. As Candace ran out of the house, he shouted after her, Let's see if you can get away from these bullets. And then shot again. When the police arrived on the scene, the officers were shocked by the unsanitary conditions in the house. Flies were flying everywhere, and there was an unbearable smell of garbage and spoiled food. The sink was littered with dirty dishes. Dog feces littered the floor in every room, and a pet rabbit sat in a dirty cage that had obviously not been cleaned in a long time. Bloodstains on the floor completed the gruesome scene. During the search, the police found a stun gun, prescription pills, a box of drug paraphernalia, and a camouflage bag containing a knife set, 2 pistols, and several magazines. One of the pistols was unregistered. Brad was immediately arrested and charged with domestic violence, but just 3 days later, Candace went to the police station and demanded that all charges against him be dropped. She claimed Brad suffered from schizophrenia, but wasn't taking his medication, which was why he regularly behaved aggressively. Candace also rashly declared that the weapons found in the house belonged to her. Since one of the pistols was unregistered, Candace effectively admitted to illegal possession of firearms. As a result, she was arrested. While fleeing Brad, Candace checked into a hotel, where the police later searched her room. A blank prescription form for a prescription drug containing a narcotic was found there. This was another reason for the charges. As a result, Candace pleaded guilty to illegal possession of firearms and falsifying a medical document. The court sentenced her to 2 years of probation. Brad was released from prison, which seemed completely illogical to many. Although Candace dropped her domestic violence complaint, the police had every reason to prosecute him for other offenses, such as public disturbance and shooting in public. The state of Michigan has strict laws prohibiting the use of firearms in public, unless for self-defense or other lawful reasons. For some reason, however, Brad was not charged with reckless shooting, even though the incident occurred in a mobile home park crowded with people. He should have also been punished for animal cruelty. He had shot a dog and kept a pet rabbit in horrific conditions. It is unknown whether the dog survived or whether the animals were removed from the house. The most horrific aspect of this is that 2 small children lived in the chaotic house. Despite the horrific circumstances, law enforcement did nothing to protect them. There was no question of taking them into custody. Gabby and Zoe remained in the mobile home, where no adequate conditions were provided for them. And Candace and Brad argued constantly, sometimes even with firearms. Those who knew the family personally report that the parents treated the younger child much better. This was very noticeable. Zoe grew up with care and love, which unfortunately could not be said for Gabby. The older she grew, the worse she was treated. When the girl turned 4, she had been toilet trained for a long time, since she was 18 months old. Cynthia made sure of this, and overall, Gabby did well. However, Candace and Brad regularly had accidents. She wouldn't make it to the toilet on time. Interestingly, there were no such problems at daycare or at Cynthia's home. The teachers noticed that Gabby was a completely independent girl and always went to the toilet on time. They suspected that something was wrong with Gabby at her mother's home. Incontinence is often a child's reaction to stress. The problem is exacerbated when parents respond to such incidents with yelling and punishment. It later emerged that Candace and Brad were doing just that. For every offense, they scolded her, beat her, and invented horrific punishments. For example, they forced the girl to take ice-cold baths, wear a garbage bag instead of clothes, and sleep in the cold living room. For fun, they scratched Gabby's back with their fingernails and gave her powerful prescription drugs that weren't prescribed for her. One of these was Adderall, which is essentially an analog of the banned substance amphetamine. The drugs caused the girl great distress, but her parents paid no attention. Brad repeatedly forced Gabby to eat her own feces and threatened to drown her. Once, in a fit of rage, he stabbed her skin with a fork. All of this abuse was filmed by the miserable parents on their cell phones and sent to each other via Facebook Messenger. On December 31st, 2017, Brad and Candace posted a photo on Facebook of themselves holding little Zoe and wishing everyone a happy new year. 4-year-old Gabby was not there. On January 1st, 2018, at 10 a.m., Candace called her adoptive mother, Cynthia, and asked her to come as soon as possible. Half an hour later, the woman entered her daughter's house and saw Gabby lying unconscious on the bathroom floor. She tried to resuscitate her, but it was no use. Cynthia then called 911. Police and paramedics quickly arrived at the scene. They began questioning Candace about what had happened. She said that Gabby loved taking baths and often did so secretly. She filled the bathtub herself and got in. The girl did the same on the morning of January 1st, but the water was too hot and scalded her. Afterward, Gabby called her mother and asked her to run warm water. Candace did so. She half-filled the bathtub and sat her daughter in it while she made pancakes for breakfast. Candace claimed that it was perfectly normal for Gabby to spend an hour or two in the bathtub, playing with her toys in the water. About an hour later, Candace came into the bathroom to check on Gabby and saw her face up in the water, unresponsive. Candace rushed to pull her daughter out of the bathtub, causing her to vomit. When Cynthia was asked what happened, she said that when she entered her adoptive daughter's house, she found Gabby unconscious on the bathroom floor. Brad gave her artificial respiration and chest compressions. Cynthia then took over and continued CPR for several more minutes. However, when she realized it wasn't working, she called emergency services. Police officers who investigated the scene doubted that any of the adults had performed CPR on Gabby, which must be administered continuously until emergency services arrive. But when paramedics entered the house, no one was near the girl. The police also found it odd that the bathroom was too dry for such an incident. Candace said she pulled her daughter out of the water, and the girl vomited. This means the floor must have been wet, as well as Candace's clothes. Gabby's body was also dry. Only her hair appeared slightly damp. The skin on her fingers wasn't wrinkled, as can happen with prolonged exposure to water. Candace, however, said that the girl had been playing in the bathtub for at least an hour. In addition, her body bore injuries and second-degree burns with characteristic blisters. In some places, the top layer of skin was missing, leaving red sores in its place. Gabby was taken to an ambulance and taken to the hospital. Candace went along. Along the way, paramedics intubated the child to clear her airway, but no water was found. This completely refuted Candace's claim of drowning. Brad stayed home with the younger child. He was in constant contact with Candace. She told him what was happening in the hospital. She wrote that she would most likely go to jail. Candace also suspected that if Gabby survived, she would be taken away by Child Protective Services because the girl would reveal how she had been treated. In one of the messages, Candace urged Brad to clean something up. What she meant by that is unknown. In her last message, Candace wrote that she was going to kill herself. Meanwhile, the police attempted to search the family home, but Brad wouldn't allow it. The officers had to leave, but soon returned with a search warrant and began searching. Pieces of skin and strands of hair were found in the bathtub drain. The investigation revealed they were Gabby's. In a trash bag in the laundry room, they found bloody gauze bandages, blood-stained strands of hair, several pairs of disposable gloves, an empty bottle of hydrogen peroxide, and a tube of topical ointment. The strands of hair also belonged to Gabby. Her DNA and Brad's DNA were also found on the disposable gloves. The police then searched Gabby's room. It didn't look like a child's bedroom at all. There was trash everywhere, scattered items, and a few old toys. A bed without any bedding sat against the wall. Police found a white powdery controlled substance in Brad and Candace's room. 4-year-old Gabby was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital. She could not be revived, so doctors pronounced her dead. The cause of death was listed as septic shock and child abuse. There was no doubt that her parents had killed the little girl. After the autopsy, details of the torture the girl had been subjected to became known. Gabby had numerous injuries caused by beatings, burns, suffocation, and other injuries. Strange red marks, blisters, and partial missing skin were the result of thermal exposure. It looked as if Gabby had been doused with boiling water, causing her to go into shock and die. No signs of drowning were found. Gabby's hair was matted and infested with lice. Several wounds were visible on her scalp. Someone had likely forcibly pulled out her hair. In addition, Gabby weighed much less than normal and did not have a single healthy tooth. All were affected by decay and necrosis. The coroner also conducted a toxicology test and, to their horror, discovered that the 4-year-old's body contained amphetamine and caffeine. The pathologist concluded that Gabby was in severe pain due to all of her injuries. In the last minutes of her life, she suffered terrible agony, which caused her heart to stop. A few days later, a warrant was issued for Candace and Brad's arrest, but it turned out that the couple had fled. They were put on the wanted list. They had most likely fled in their car, a black 2002 Chevrolet Cavalier with a Michigan license plate. A few days later, Candace and Brad were found 1,000 kilometers from their home in the state of Georgia. Upon their arrest, they stated that it was a misunderstanding. They had not fled, but on the contrary, driven to Michigan to turn themselves in to the authorities. In court, the couple justified their actions by claiming that they suffered from serious mental illnesses that had not been treated. The couple hoped that this would help them, if not avoid punishment, then at least mitigate their sentences. Candace and Brad were evaluated, and indeed, they were diagnosed with disorders. Candace, 24, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. She claimed that it was all due to the poor parenting she received as a child from her biological mother. Brad, 28, was diagnosed with schizoaffective personality disorder, social anxiety disorder, PTSD, and agoraphobia, the fear of large crowds. In court, Cynthia, Candace's adoptive mother, appeared to be trying to protect her daughter. Gabby visited her quite often and spent several weeks at her house. The judge asked Cynthia what condition the girl was in and what she looked like. The woman replied, "Normal, normal to me." Cynthia said that Gabby had spent the last week of November with her. They celebrated Thanksgiving together. She was in good health, normal weight, clean and well-groomed hair, healthy teeth, and overall, the girl felt well. The next time Cynthia saw her granddaughter was at Christmas. She was happy to see her grandmother, who had brought gifts. That day too, Cynthia saw nothing suspicious or alarming. She said Candace had told her that Gabby had lice, but Cynthia hadn't seen any herself. The woman claimed that the girl appeared normal even on the day the tragedy occurred. She only noticed red spots on her legs and buttocks. In fact, these weren't just marks, but burns with missing skin, and there were many more of them. But Cynthia insisted she didn't know what they were. She hadn't seen anything unusual. The child looked normal. Contrary to all expectations, Cynthia was not charged. Brad Edward Fields was charged with murder and abuse. His defense attorneys claimed he hadn't been involved in Gabby's abuse, but the messages on the messengers suggested otherwise. After the arrest, police confiscated the couple's cell phones and examined all correspondence between Brad and Candace. These included numerous photos and videos that documented the couple's abuse of Gabby. On October 9, 2018, Brad was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He never admitted his guilt. Candace Renea Diaz was charged with the same charges as Brad, but on December 5, 2018, she made a plea deal with prosecutors, which dropped some charges and resulted in a prison sentence of 30 to 60 years. In court, Candace confessed that she beat her daughter on January 1st and then poured boiling water on her, causing Gabby's death. She was unable to give a reason for her actions. On Saturday, January 13, 2018, a public memorial service for Gabrielle Barrett was held at a funeral home in Westland. A private ceremony, attended only by relatives, was held the following day. Gabby's body was cremated. It is unknown if she was buried in a public cemetery. Gabby's father, 26-year-old Kyle Barrett, learned about his daughter's death from the news. He had no idea where she was, as he lost contact with Candace after he was sent to prison in September 2017. Kyle was released on January 3rd, just 2 days after Gabby's death. He last saw his daughter before his incarceration. That day, after a walk, he hugged her, kissed her, and told her he loved her. The fate of 1-year-old Zoe, Candace's youngest daughter, is unknown. Both parents' parental rights were terminated, and Child Protective Services removed the girl from Michigan. Information about her is confidential, but rumors say Zoe was adopted. She now lives with a loving family where she is well cared for. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.
It all happened on December 10, 2021. On that day, 48-year-old public school teacher Cruz Maguad was at Banisilan Central Elementary School, where his wife, Lovela Maguad, worked as the principal. He was helping renovate the building. At around 3:00 p.m., his phone rang. It was their neighbor. The man reported that he had noticed something strange while passing by that might indicate a break-in. Although he hadn't gone inside the house, he felt it was important to inform Cruz immediately. Cruz immediately called his wife, who was out, and urged her to come home. Then he dropped everything and rushed home. At the time, the Maguad's children were believed to be at home. 18-year-old Chryzel Gwyn, 16-year-old Chris Louis, and their recently adopted 17-year-old daughter Janice. Cruz arrived at the house at 3:40 p.m. It was unusually quiet, and when he looked through the window, he saw a blanket with what looked like blood stains lying in front of the front door. He tried to call the children, but there was no answer. Then he went to the back door and quietly entered the house. Inside, an oppressive silence reigned. After quickly checking the ground floor, Cruz stopped in the living room. There, he saw his daughter Chryzel Gwyn lying on the floor. The blanket he had seen outside was covering her. When he pulled it back, Cruz saw that the girl had severe injuries, particularly to her neck. Nearby, next to the front door, lay her brother Chris Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and his mouth was gagged. The young man also had numerous injuries. The condition of the house and the amount of blood suggested that everything had happened just a short time ago. However, Cruz didn't think about it at the time. Overcome with fear, he continued searching for Janice. When he called her, she came out of the room. Her hair was wet, her face pale with the horror she had experienced. Janice was shaking violently and could barely speak. When Cruz saw her, he tried to control himself. He took the girl downstairs and immediately called the police. When the officers arrived at the scene, they realized they were dealing with one of the most serious cases of their careers. After she had recovered somewhat, Janice explained that they had been robbed, even though it was obvious. The house was in complete chaos. All the cupboards were open and personal belongings were scattered on the floor. At first glance, everything looked as if a break-in had occurred. However, the police knew that outward appearances alone were not enough to confirm this version. They had to determine whether any valuable items were missing from the house. At the same time, the police were investigating whether the Maguad couple might have any connection to the incident. Therefore, the officers first checked their alibi. After some time, the police's attention turned to the room where Janice had been during the robbery. Despite the general chaos in the house, this particular room appeared significantly tidier than the others. While this was not suspicious in itself, one would have expected a somewhat different picture in an ordinary burglary. A subsequent thorough examination of the house and the surrounding grounds led to important discoveries both inside and outside the house. For example, a shirt with stains resembling bloodstains was found next to the front door. It was presumed to have belonged to the attacker who had discarded it while fleeing. Further evidence was found several hundred meters from the house, a plastic bag containing blood-stained items. The bag was lying in one of the ditches. All of this suggested that someone had deliberately tried to dispose of evidence. With each passing hour, the atmosphere in the house became more oppressive. Further examination of the rooms found a knife with a damaged handle, a machete, a baseball bat, and a hammer. These items, as well as the nature of the injuries, suggested the brutality of the attack. Later, after examining the blood at the crime scene, experts concluded that Chryzel Gwynn, the couple's eldest child, had been attacked first. This was confirmed by the fact that her blood had already clotted and her body already showed natural cadaveric changes. Chris Louis' blood, on the other hand, appeared fresher, suggesting that he had been killed somewhat later. Furthermore, Chris Louis' hands and feet were bound, while Chryzel Gwynn's were not. This suggested that she had been taken by surprise, whereas the attacker must have taken a different approach in Chris Louis' case. The presence of multiple murder weapons also raised many questions. Typically, such a situation can indicate the involvement of several people. This version was also supported by the fact that Chris Louis was bound. It would have been much more difficult for a single person to do so. Complicating matters, however, was the fact that all the items found belonged to Cruz himself, who honestly reported this to the police. Another oddity caught the officer's attention while establishing the facts. It appeared as if someone had turned on the washing machine during the incident. No freshly washed clothes were found in the house. And although the true reason for operating the washing machine was never clarified, it suggested the attackers were attempting to cover their tracks at the crime scene. Given the unprecedented nature of the crime, local authorities immediately began searching for suspects. Over time, the gruesome act shocked the entire Philippine society. To expedite the investigation, authorities offered a reward for information that could help solve the case. This measure once again underscored the severity and extent of the crime. The autopsy began on December 13, 2021, and lasted several days. It was determined that Chryzel Gwynn had suffered 32 stab and laceration wounds. Some of these were so deep that they destroyed tissue in individual parts of her body. In addition, traces of blows from a blunt object, which could have been a hammer or a baseball bat, were found on the woman's body at the crime scene. The backs of her hands were covered with wounds, indicating an attempt at self-defense. As for Chris Louis, the autopsy revealed 5 stab and laceration wounds. Some of the injuries were so deep that they damaged bones and internal organs. Additionally, red marks were found on the young man's neck, indicating a possible strangulation attempt. Unlike his sister, Chris Louis showed no signs of struggle or active resistance. However, injuries to his limbs and torso were found, caused by blows with a blunt instrument. Given the number and nature of the injuries, police ruled out robbery. Although the Maguad family home did indeed look as if someone had attempted to break in to steal something, no valuables were missing except for Chryzel Gwyn's cell phone. All of this suggested that the perpetrators may have known their victims personally. Shortly after the autopsy results were released, the media began to speculate about Janice's possible involvement. This was mainly due to the fact that she was the only survivor. However, the accusations against her quickly escalated, and some users even began threatening her. Under pressure from public opinion, the police decided to interrogate Janice. During the interrogation, she recounted her version of events. According to her, she was in the bedroom with Chryzel Gwyn at the time, while Chris Louis was in the living room. Suddenly, they heard his scream and saw 3 men enter the house. Janice claimed that she and Chryzel Gwyn ran downstairs to help Chris Louis. But when she saw the guns in the stranger's hands, she ran back into the room, locked herself in, and hid under the bed. Unable to call the police and afraid of being heard, Janice decided to write a message in the family chat and then send it to her adoptive mother. However, these messages remained unread. After a while, the distraught young woman wrote another message, this time on social media. The text read, "Help, someone broke into our house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding under my bed in my room." Help, according to Janice, she deleted the message just minutes later because she was afraid one of the attackers might see her. Later, she tried calling her mother again, but her mother didn't answer. Lovela, the mother, only called Janice back after seeing her message. According to the young woman, she was too scared to answer the call at the time. Janice eventually changed her social media username and turned off her phone. As soon as the house was quiet again, Janice ventured out of her hiding place. Instead of going downstairs, she went to the bathroom to take a shower and calm down. At that very moment, Cruz arrived home. At first glance, Janice's story seemed plausible, but there were some inconsistencies. She claimed that she locked herself in her room shortly after the attack began, but then the question arises, why was her room also messy? Furthermore, Janice's statements that Chris Louis was the first victim contradicted the results of the forensic examination. Recall that according to these statements, Chryzel Gwyn was the first victim. This discrepancy between the girl's statement and the physical evidence prompted the police to further investigate Janice. As suspicions grew, the officers also decided to examine the statement of her adoptive father, Cruz. During the conversation with the man, it became clear that Janice's version of events had undergone some changes. She had originally claimed to have turned off her phone shortly after the attack, but Cruz recalled that he had called her and his call had not been answered, even though the phone had remained switched on. Cruz later provided information about the objects used as weapons by the perpetrators, which raised new suspicions. It turned out that the baseball bat had originally belonged to Chris Louis. He had kept it in his room next to his bed. When Janice moved into the house, she moved into that room and the bat stayed there. Cruz kept the hammer used in the attack at home. He usually hid it behind the washing machine, and according to him, only 3 people knew about it. Himself, Chryzel Gwyn, and Janice. Janice's statements raised more and more questions over time. This was partly due to the police's conversation with one of the delivery service employees. According to available information, the delivery person had arrived at the Maguad's home just 20 minutes before Cruz's neighbor called. After sending a message about his arrival, the delivery person received no response. He then got out of the car and went to the house to look inside. After a few minutes, he noticed a girl looking at him and then simply walking away. Although the delivery person could not determine the girl's identity, this fact led investigators to doubt that Janice was actually in her room at the time of the attack. Another important detail was the condition of the front door. It was locked from the inside and showed no signs of forced entry. This suggested that the perpetrators knew the victims. The lack of signs of forced entry narrowed the circle of potential suspects to 3 people. They were Cruz, who was known to be elsewhere, his wife Lovla, who was away, and Janice, whose presence in the house was beyond question. However, the investigation was complicated by the fact that Janice was a minor. In the Philippines, the arrest of a minor without irrefutable evidence is fraught with legal difficulties, which is why the police were not hasty in their arrest and handed the girl over to the custody of the Social Services Department. Shortly afterwards, on December 15, 2021, it was known that Janice's fingerprints had been found on all of the items used in the robbery. Although the presence of fingerprints was not considered definitive proof of her involvement, since Janice lived in the house where all these items were kept, and her fingerprints could have been on them through normal use, it added to the suspicion. Sometime later, while searching Janice's room, her foster mother, Lovla, found a paper form for collecting contact information. It belonged to 17-year-old Esmeraldo Canela Jr., also known as Aldo, who worked at the church and knew Janice from the children's home. This discovery prompted the police to investigate Aldo for his possible involvement in the crime. Evidence soon emerged that confirmed their suspicions. A witness reported seeing Aldo let Janice out of the car near her home shortly before the crime. Another witness testified that he asked a young man, identified as Aldo, for directions near the crime scene. On December 16 of that year, Janice met with her lawyer and made a detailed confession. Importantly, the girl not only confessed to her involvement in the crime, but also pointed out the involvement of her 20-year-old boyfriend and their mutual friend, Esmeraldo Canela Jr. She also stated that she acted out of jealousy of her adoptive parents. In her opinion, her brother and sister had denied her her parents' undivided attention and love. In other words, Janice justified her motive with the desire to be the only beloved child in the family. After many years of suffering and humiliation, Janice stated that by eliminating Chryzel Gwyn and Chris Louis, she hoped to remain the only one receiving her parents' full care and support. On December 18, Janice made a confession. The police then tracked down Aldo, who immediately reported his role in the crime. An investigation later confirmed that the blood police had found on the items thrown into the ditch was his. It is noteworthy that on the same day, another young man was arrested during a raid on controlled substances. While searching his personal belongings, police found a cell phone belonging to Chryzel Gwyn. By comparing the serial numbers, investigators were able to confirm that it was indeed the phone stolen during the robbery. It was later revealed that Janice, unable to get rid of the phone, had hired Aldo to sell it to one of his acquaintances. It is important to note that due to the local legal system and juvenile justice systems, the police were unable to release all the details of Janice and Aldo's confessions. For this reason, the exact sequence of events leading to the tragedy, as well as many other circumstances, remain unclear. As for the identity of the third alleged participant, a 20-year-old young man whom Janice had mentioned, the police were unable to identify him. As far as is known, investigators concluded that this person was invented to partially absolve herself of responsibility. About a week after the tragedy, Loveland gave her first interview. Speaking to the media, she primarily expressed her deep dismay at Janice's involvement in the events. Loveland recalled disturbing signs that, in retrospect, should have been alarming. According to her, she met Janice in 2020 when she was working as a housekeeper for a close friend of hers. Loveland and Chryzel Gwynn often visited this woman. A friendship quickly developed between the girls. Over time, Janice began to ask Chryzel Gwynn for help with her studies, and Chryzel Gwynn, who was known for her kindness, was happy to help. Little by little, Janice told Chryzel Gwynn about her difficult childhood, her life of poverty, and about how she ended up in an orphanage after her parents died. She also told her that she would no longer receive government support after reaching adulthood. Chryzel Gwynn, moved by Janice's situation, spoke to her parents and suggested they adopt the girl. Although the couple was initially hesitant, Chryzel Gwynn was able to convince them. According to the Maguad family, Janice's transition into their care in July 2021 went smoothly. At first, it seemed as if she felt at home. However, over time, disturbing incidents began to occur. In August of that year, Loveland's parents ended up in the hospital, and Cruz recalled that he had set aside money for emergencies. When he looked for his savings, they were gone. When Janice learned of this, she said the money might have been stolen by strangers. The next day, however, Cruz found a considerable sum in her backpack. After lengthy discussions, the girl confessed that she had taken the money. Nevertheless, the Maguads forgave Janice, given her difficult past. Over time, her behavior deteriorated. The once hardworking girl gradually lost interest in chores. When reminded, she apologized but rarely kept her promise. This behavior worried her adoptive parents but was not considered a serious threat. The most unusual sign was that on the morning of the day of the tragedy, Janice addressed Cruz and Loveland as Mommy and Daddy for the first time, something she had never done before. This may indicate her emotional state before the planned crime. During the investigation, it also emerged that Janice had concealed the truth about her origins. Her stories about being an orphan turned out to be lies. Janice's parents were not only alive but had also been trying to find her for years. When the case became public and became a hot topic of discussion on social media, many users tried to research the young woman's past and find her family. Thanks to these efforts, an old missing person report was found, revealing a small part of her story. The report stated that on September 22, 2013, a little girl, approximately 7 or 8 years old, was found on a ship in Cotabato Province in central Mindanao Island, Philippines. The girl called herself Janice and claimed she had no memory of who she was or how she got on the ship. Believing she was lost or abandoned by her parents, local authorities and concerned citizens spread information about her whereabouts. It was later revealed that Janice was born in 2005 and was the third child in her family. Her early years were filled with turmoil, and at one point her father's gambling addiction destroyed the family. After her mother remarried and gave birth to another child, Janice was placed in a children's home. By 2020, before the girl was adopted, she had already made contact with her biological mother and other relatives, but their relationship was short-lived. Janice's mother attended Chryzel Gwynn and Chris Louis' funeral. There, Cruz and Lovella asked the woman to visit Janice at the social services office and try to persuade her to confess to her crime. The mother attempted to comply, but Janice refused. Meanwhile, the police received new evidence suggesting a deliberate act. These included screenshots of the young woman's correspondence with an unknown young man. In the messages, Janice admitted that she had wanted to get rid of her adopted siblings from the beginning. She believed this would bring her the long-awaited love and freedom. The girl also asked if anyone would take her in if she carried out her plan, believing that God would forgive her no matter what. After these messages appeared online, some users suspected that Janice was inspired by the film Orphan, also known as The Child of Darkness. This film's plot centers on the story of a family who, after losing their child, adopts a girl who subsequently exhibits disturbing and violent behavior. Even after the trial began, Janice showed no signs of remorse. On the contrary, she was seen smiling and laughing several times despite the circumstances. In one of their interviews, Cruz and Lovella admitted that they would have been willing to forgive Janice if she had shown even the slightest hint of remorse. However, their indifference made the trial even more painful. Be that as it may, justice was served. In May 2022, Janice and Esmeraldo Cainla Jr. were found guilty. They were sentenced to 31 and 29 years in prison, respectively. Both convicts had to serve their sentences under the supervision of social services rather than in a regular prison. Chryzel Gwynn and Chris Louis' parents reacted to this decision with mixed feelings. Although they acknowledged that the court had imposed the maximum possible sentence under the law, the couple believed that the existing measures were too lenient and disproportionate to the gravity of the crime. What most outraged them was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Subsequently, Cruz and Lovella actively advocated for an amendment to the law governing the criminal responsibility of minors. Under the legislation at the time, the age of criminal responsibility in the Philippines was 15. While young people between the ages of 15 and 18 could be prosecuted, they were initially sent to special reform schools rather than adult prisons. Essentially, this law protected minors and allowed them to avoid harsher punishments, even when their crimes were extremely serious. According to the Maguad couple, such laws should be revised to ensure that juveniles who committed serious crimes take full responsibility for their actions. Thanks for watching and take care of yourselves.